Good morning, everyone. How are you? Yeah, you're awake. Sounds good. All right, so welcome to the second day. We had a pretty busy day, and I know many of you are tired. But thanks for showing up bright and early. Make sure you get some coffee and some of those wonderful bagels and wake yourselves up. Today we do have a pretty full program again, as much as yesterday. One of the highlights we have coming in this afternoon is we have the Mobile Emergency Communications Vehicle coming in. And this is for those of you who are interested in disaster communications and remote communications with satellite and wireless. This truly is the state of the art. I had a very small hand in helping design some of this. So it's an impressive vehicle. It's going to be out back, which is if you go downstairs and out past the swimming pool, which is technically that way, it will be right out there. So make sure that you take 5 or 10 minutes in the afternoon. They'll be coming on after lunch. So that's one exciting point. And this morning we have 2 plenary speakers. We have Luke here from Intel, and we have Camille Crittenden from Citrus. So Luke works at Intel, which is where I met him because I do there as well. And he's part of the Corporate Responsibility Office, and he manages the Intel Education Service Corps. And this is an employee program that provides technical assistance to NGOs and governments and deploys Intel solutions in developing countries. So Luke comes from sales and marketing and a lot of experience in emerging markets in technology and renewable energy sources. And he has also managed an NGO projects on the ground in Africa. He was also a Peace Corps volunteer, and he focused there on microfinance and business. So I'd like to have you all welcome Luke.
Thank you, Catherine. All right. And probably just turn this one off, if that's okay. Morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. So before I start, Catherine actually asked that everybody please turn off their electronic appliances. And since this is an IEEE event, she actually gave me a list. It's pretty extensive list, actually. So if you could please turn off your cell phones, tablets, laptop computers, microcontrollers, spectrometers, oscilloscopes, light-emitting diodes, large hadron colliders, actually, correction, large, medium, and small hadron colliders. We're good to go? All right. Great. I figured this was a Sunday 8 a.m. slot. A lot of you would rather be either sleeping or in church, so I decided that I should try to be at least as funny as like your average, Protestant pastor. So great to see you all. Catherine, thank you for the introduction. I'll start off just kind of taking you through a couple of more details of kind of how I got to this point at Intel and running the program that Catherine mentioned. So I started my career actually in public relations here in Silicon Valley, and I was kind of one of those nameless, faceless, they call them flacks. And so I was doing a lot of cold calling of journalists and writing press releases. And this had a few obvious disadvantages. The advantages including kind of building up a little bit of a tolerance for rejection, which I think is healthy in life, and gave me some free time. I was also doing stand-up comedy in the evenings, which was sort of exploring an interesting outlet. And it exposed me to technology and to great entrepreneurs. Most of our clients were startups in very technical areas that was quite hard as a non-engineer to really make sense of. But just that exposure to founders and that kind of that passion was great. And it also did something else that was really a twist of fate. As a volunteer project for our office in Menlo Park, we had the opportunity to work with a nonprofit that basically has a fundraising dance company of HIV/AIDS orphans from Uganda. So talk about a left turn from semiconductor startups, but I got to spend a couple of weeks with this group of 20 Ugandan children. And by the end of 2 years in the PR business, my boss, the owner of this PR firm, she had joined the board of this nonprofit, and I said to her, you know what, I would like to work for them. So I packed my bags, I moved to their office their US office in Dallas, and then I got to go to Uganda, spent 3 weeks there, and then traveled around the US for 3 months with this dance troupe. As their tour manager, I was not given the gift of dance. And so that really kind of sparked my passion for kind of the whole range of issues that are affecting people in Uganda, sub-Saharan Africa, to some extent the developing world in general. And I kind of really never turned back on that, although I have come full circle in a couple of ways. I kind of had my heart set on the Peace Corps at that point. I didn't go directly. I kind of was a little bit reluctant. I moved to DC. I spent a couple of years working at the headquarters of a sustainable development nonprofit. And finally, I took the plunge, moved to Mauritania. You'll see the star kind of up on the left side, just south of Morocco. And after that, I moved to Chad. And like Catherine mentioned, I was focused on microfinance, business education in Mauritania. And in Chad, I worked for one of the kind of, I worked for Windrock International, and they're one of these nonprofits that works a lot with USAID and foundations. And I implemented a clean cook stove project. And so I spent about 1.5 years in the capital of Chad setting up a supply chain and marketing program for a cleaner burning stove. And that was a 3-year period where I lived in West Africa. It was great. Something was sort of calling me home. Partly, I think I wanted to settle down and get married. Maybe it was one piece of it. So I went back to school, did my MBA at Berkeley, met my wife, and then joined a startup. And so this startup, Phoenix International, they're still active today. They make a kind of plug-and-play solar energy system, particularly focused around mobile phone charging in sub-Saharan Africa. And so I was their first salesperson. I traveled all over Africa to probably 12 countries working with the mobile network operator companies to do field trials and get that product kind of in the hands of small entrepreneurs. And I did that for about 2 years. And then I realized something was calling me home again. At that point, it actually was my wife saying, hey, you're traveling a little bit more than is about 50% on the road. And so I was able to join Intel at that point, just under 4 years ago. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about my work at Intel. For those of you who maybe don't have a computer, aren't that interested in technology, I should tell you that Intel is a world leader in computing innovation. Just kidding, you all know Intel. But I think our mission statement is worth mentioning, basically bringing these smart connected devices to every person on Earth, which is obviously an ambitious mission statement, although I sometimes joke, well, we stopped with the people. We're not committed to bringing these devices to all the animals and plants yet, so at least it's only 7 billion. So the work that I do, Catherine mentioned it a bit, so the Intel Education Service Corps. And this is essentially, at its heart, it's a way for Intel to engage in emerging markets. From a kind of a tactical perspective, what it really looks like is a volunteer program, an employee volunteer program, but a very kind of special one that I guess you could say isn't really your typical volunteer experience. So we actually select teams of employees, and the teams would look a lot like the 5 individuals here. In this case, this is a team that we sent to Haiti. We have Randall on the left, who's an IT expert from Costa Rica, Mitch, who's a software engineer in Arizona, Brita, who's a logistics supply chain expert based in the Netherlands. Shay is a factory automation kind of technician in one of our factories in Ireland. And then Mark was the kind of the team lead. He is a kind of a business manager, has an MBA. You always have to have one MBA in the group just to sort of keep them on track. And so this is a program that you can throw out a lot of different buzzwords. Probably the most popular one right now is a shared value program. And so if you think about all the different stakeholders that we reach from touching employees and giving them interesting experiences. I'll touch on that. Working with our business groups that are trying to deploy technology in the developing world, nonprofit organizations, foundations, donor organizations that we collaborate with, really trying to create positive value across those stakeholders rather than simply trying to sell a product. In terms of the actual technology that we do deploy, I would say it's relatively diverse for a company like Intel. I mean, a lot of people might be surprised that we actually are involved in some more like finished products rather than just making ingredients. We have a full education solution, including laptops and tablets for students, for teachers, software that kind of works in the classroom, content from that works offline in many cases in areas without good internet, from Khan Academy to other resources around training teachers and digital literacy. So we're deploying solutions in education, to some extent health, and mobile. We even have a joint venture with the Grameen Trust. So this is something that is amazing to a lot of people, that Mohammed Yunus and one of our prior CEOs sat down maybe 7, 8 years ago and we're talking about ways of collaborating. They said, well, rather than writing a check, or why don't we start a company together? So they actually started a company called Grameen Intel Social Business that makes software primarily to help farmers increase their productivity. So we send teams, in terms of the last 5 years, we've sent about 80 teams, just over 400 employees to over 20 countries. They come from about 20 countries, and they've trained about 12,000 people, deployed around 2,500 devices, and contributed somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 million in pro bono labor through their time. So I'll talk about a few other aspects of the program through some of my examples. So when you think about the challenges that this conference is really focused on, some of these big global challenges, I would describe it as being a pretty bumpy, long, and lonely road. These are really just difficult areas to make progress in. And I think the big trend in the last 10 years or so has been towards more partnership. Again, I mentioned there's a lot of buzzwords around that, from public-private partnerships to multi-stakeholder projects to shared value initiatives. But I think the key point being that not too many people are really working in their silos and going it alone anymore, which I think is largely a good thing. There is this African proverb that's been mentioned, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Maybe the person that wrote that proverb didn't try to convene, someone from the private sector, a foundation, academia, and a nonprofit all at a table together to try to work together. It's not easy, and I'll touch on some of those challenges. But the benefits are enormous. I'll start just with kind of the corporate perspective. I would say, to generalize, most people in the private sector share the same concerns about the world as everyone else and want to make an impact in these big global challenges. And the difficulty often being that the epicenter of a lot of these issues is in a place where there's significant market failure. Let's say like a refugee camp, a disaster area, or simply where the business infrastructure isn't really conducive to a profitable business, really on your own. From the perspective of the NGOs and donor agencies, follow the money is sometimes one way to think about it. So the number on the top, 127 billion, is for 2012. That's the official development assistance number, and that's all forms of official assistance from the OECD countries. And it includes everything from USAID and the World Bank and foundations, things like that. The number on the bottom, 307, 2.5 times bigger, is the private number, and that includes foreign direct investment and all kinds of other things. It probably vastly understates the real number if you're looking at maybe remittances that aren't tracked and things like that. But the point being that for a foundation or for a development agency, they're always looking for leverage, right, or cost share, or other resources to bring to the table. So I took a look at USAID's website. They have this program called the Global Development Alliance. They're really focused on creating these public-private partnerships. And they said that in the last decade, they've created over 1,500 of these partnerships, which is a lot. And they really feel that it helps them create more sustainable projects. To bring in a little bit of politics here, I don't know if you know how USAID gets their money. It's from all of you. They go to Congress and they ask for their funds. So to be able to tell Congress, hey, by the way, we're also knocking on Intel's door and we're getting them to contribute to this process is a very good thing for them. But it really goes well beyond the money. And that's, I think, one of the main points is that not only have the number of these partnerships started to increase, but I think the quality has as well. And so the traditional philanthropy of cutting a check or donating some product, in my opinion, that's kind of long gone as a best practice. I think there are situations, let's say disaster relief or certain projects where it makes sense to just write a check or to donate some equipment. And Intel is like a lot of other companies in that respect. But the ability to combine donor resources with in-kind donations, expertise, implementation experts is really, I think, the recipe that kind of takes it to the next level. So in terms of the recipe for success, I thought about that 1,500 number, and I thought, okay, well, some number of those must have been successful, and some number must have failed, and some number we haven't found out yet. So what is it that makes these engagements successful? So I want to talk about a couple of different possibilities. So the first possibility is funding, and it makes sense, right? You really can't do much without some funding. So the second possibility is the thing itself, the product, the hardware, the solution. This is a picture here of a beautiful improved cook stove. That's not the one that I was peddling in Chad. Mine was actually much simpler looking. It was an older technology called the Kenya Ceramic Jiko. This is actually developed out of Lawrence Berkeley Labs. An incredible, beautiful piece of technology that's probably an order of magnitude more efficient than a 3-stone fire, and a great product. Or is it your ability to plan? The ability to really plan out your project and understand, what's our timeline, what are our goals, and what are our strengths and weaknesses, and how are we going to market this, and where's the money coming from? That must be important. So I thought I would kind of exit this conversation a little bit and think about another possibility, and I thought, why not Sand Hill Road? If anybody knows, who can tell me what's on Sand Hill Road? VCs, right, the venture capitalists. So I thought that was a good place to stop for one major reason, and that being, well, two reasons. One, I actually think it's pretty logical. There's a lot in common, right? So at a sort of abstract level. So I think in both the humanitarian space and the venture capital space, you're looking for big change, right? It's not something where incremental, make things a little bit better is really what's needed. And you have to take risky bets. You're not sure exactly what's going to work and what's not. And then the other reason is that also another trend in the last 10 or 15 years or so in humanitarian circles is starting to borrow the language and perspectives of the private sector. And you'll find a lot of big agencies now have innovation offices or managers who are trying to borrow the best practices from venture capital to a large extent. But if you talk to most venture capitalists, sorry, I just gave away my punchline here. If you talk to most venture capitalists, it's not the funding, it's not the product, and it's really not the planning. So I think funding is important. I think there are a lot of people who claim, let's take like the social venture space. They'll say, well, there might be a little money for seed capital, and then you could go down to Sand Hill Road if you want $5 million, but there's not that money in the middle there, so you can never really scale up your ideas. And in the humanitarian space, the development space, there's a lot of people complaining about what they call pilot-itis. there's so many pilot projects, and then they never scale. So, but I think a venture capitalist would tell you, it's not because of the lack of funds. If you have the right recipe, you'll find the money from somewhere. And then the product, I would say that's probably not the product either. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. And then, what was my last one here? The planning, well, I think you would find most venture capitalists would tell you, if you send them a business plan, they will not read it. Nobody reads business plans anymore. So what is the recipe that they're looking for? And it's the people. It's the founder. It's the founding team. And I heard an example that really brought this home. There's an accelerator called Y Combinator. I don't know if you've heard of them. They do a lot of interesting investments. And the founder said something quite interesting in an interview, and he actually admitted in the interview, I probably shouldn't be saying this. He said they have something that they call internally fund for the pivot. And what this means is that they're sitting across the table with somebody hearing a pitch, and they'll go to deliberate, and they'll say, that idea is so terrible, but that founder is so incredible that we are going to invest in this person. Even though we know the idea is going to fail, we just want to be able to start working with this man or woman and work on their next idea that will succeed. So I guess my question then is, why should it be any different in humanitarian circles? So to kind of illustrate how over the last 3 or 4 years at Intel, I've been able to work with some really incredible people. I wanted to give you 3 examples, and one is from an employee, one is from one of our humanitarian NGO partners, and then the last one is actually from a teacher on the ground in Kenya that we've actually worked with. So starting off with an employee. So John Cartwright is a 17-year Intel veteran. He started off in IT. He's now actually in our education technologies group. And so he's been able 4 times actually to participate as an education service corps volunteer. Doesn't normally have monkeys on each shoulder. I was trying to find a before picture, but this is more of the after. So John was engaged in the first IESC trip that went to Haiti. And this was about 1.5 years after the earthquake. There was actually funding from Zynga, from the internet company, to build a school in the Central Highlands in a town called Mirabale. And so John was recruited as a technical expert for the team. And he traveled there with the team with the expectation that they would find a relatively newly built school and the ability to set up this technology lab. And they had calls. I was actually involved in this for about 6 weeks, with the people on the ground, with the principal. As it turned out, when we got there, the school was really still under construction. A great example of you never quite know what you're going to find on the ground until you actually get there. I still run it through my mind of how we didn't find that out. And the best I can tell, they didn't want us to cancel our trip, right? So it's fine, don't worry. Yeah, we're putting a few finishing touches on it. But so we started our teacher training, and there were people sawing through metal in the next room, and it was a little bit touch and go. But actually, as it turned out, so John is one of these engineer types that, or maybe grew up watching MacGyver and ended up kind of emulating him. He was able to step in and find out that they had wired the computer lab classroom. The electricity was wired in reverse, so it would have ruined all the equipment anyhow. So he was able to detect that with a little instrument and have the engineers fix it. He was able to work with the principal to make sure they understood how to use their generator, how to maintain it, how to make sure they protected that investment. And he even had a chance to get involved in digging like a 50-foot trench and teaching the local workers how to pull Cat6 cable through conduit and bury it so that it would be able to provide the network connection in both the computer lab and the sort of administrative building. And then lastly, he was able to kind of get up on a very rickety-looking ladder and help the school get their internet connection turned on, which was by local standards, really incredible. It was a subsidized connection that allowed them to get about 1 megabit of download speed into their school. So at the end of that 2 weeks, John went back to the US, and as most of our volunteers do in our program, they go back to their day job. And most of them go back with a new experience, new point of view, new perspective, but they continue largely doing what they were doing before. In John's case, that turned out to not really be too interesting for him at that point. He kept doing his day job, but he said, you know what, I have a lot of observations about this software that we were deploying. It really wasn't right for the emerging market space. You know, it needed a gigabit switched network, and it needed a server that got really hot, and they had to have a little closet with an air conditioning unit. And he said, this is not going to work. So he ended up spending months and months with the vendor, with this third-party company that's one of our education partners, and really redesigning this solution. And then he went up to the top management levels at Intel and made a request for what's called an extended service sabbatical. And he took a month and went to Kenya and worked with one of our other partners. And he got this solution that used to be running on this really heavy footprint, running all on the classmate PC laptops. One of them acted as a server. And even you could bring it all out of the principal's office, who had, at this one school, had electricity, and into a classroom and set it up with a wireless access point running off of a car battery. And then you could run the solution for 6 hours or something like that. So totally re-engineered it. I was able to spend a month in Kenya setting it up, and then he went back to Haiti again with a team and deployed this kind of new and improved solution. And then he even kind of coached an IESC team, traveled on his own time to Nepal with his wife, who was getting a teaching credential, and helped the 5 individuals, 2 of them pictured there, working with the principal of this school in Kathmandu, to set up this new and improved solution that has been running now for about 6 months. So he actually, the story doesn't end there. Just recently, John decided to start his own B corporation that is importing and roasting and selling coffee from Kenya and Nepal through a lot of the contacts he made on this trip. And then he set up a parallel foundation where the profits are going to go into more education projects. So, and he moved into our education group at Intel. So really amazing example of somebody where 3 years ago when I met him, this was something he just kind of wanted to explore and see if it was for him. And now it's really kind of reshaped the way he thinks about his career and his contributions, both at work and outside of work. So I wanted to move on to our partners. So we've been working quite a bit with World Vision as one of our international NGO partners. And so Dennis Nyakea is a project manager in Kenya. He's based in Nairobi. He's worked for World Vision for about 10 years or so. And he got called into a new initiative that we were doing to really work in some very remote parts of Kenya. If you can imagine a bridge of this nature, this is a pretty rural area. Luckily, you didn't have to walk across this bridge every day to get to the school. This was kind of one of their fun days on the weekend. But the problem statement in Kenya, as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar, within the last decade or so, they've achieved universal primary education. But now you really have a huge education quality problem. So you have a lot of students who used to be kind of on the outside of the classroom and now are on the inside of the classroom, but the education quality is not quite what it should be. I just read the other day that maybe only 1/3 of teachers in Kenya feel like they have mastery over their curriculum. So there's a huge problem there. Despite the existence of basic needs, World Vision felt very strongly that technology could bring a lot to the education system. And so we worked together to set up technology labs that are now running in about 30 schools in Kenya and Tanzania. And these provide that education solution that I was talking about in terms of devices for students that are rugged and pretty low cost, a local server that delivers a kind of a simulation of some valuable internet type content, so the ability to search a pretty big cache of Wikipedia articles that teachers and students can use to do research and explore topics, Khan Academy videos, some kind of curricula, digital literacy curricula from Intel, from Microsoft. And so this project that we've started is called Spark a Child's Digital Future, brings in Microsoft, British Council, and also consults very closely with the Kenyan Ministry of Education in terms of school selection and kind of making sure that we're borrowing from them in terms of best practices and curriculum and things of that nature. But kind of going back to the people angle for a second, we are working in some areas that frankly our supply chain does not very effectively cover. You know, if you drive you know, outside of Nairobi too far, you'll find that technical expertise isn't quite what we might like to see to maintain this type of solution. So Dennis is not by training an IT expert, but through working with 3 different Intel Education Service Corps teams, he's been able to learn everything from how to image and clone PCs to working with the server itself. So here you see a picture of him kind of taking apart you know, or putting together the guts of one of these classroom content servers. And he's just the type of guy who just absorbs, you know, this information, and it's a two-way street really with our teams, and the kind of the peer coaching and mentoring. He's learning about technology and best practices and everything from logistics to deployment to teacher professional development, and our teams are learning about you know, any number of things about life in Kenya and the education system and how World Vision works with communities. So it's a really, really rich partnership. So my third example, kind of going down to the classroom level. So Jane is a preschool teacher also in Kenya in a different part of the country in a town called Thika. And Jane is somebody we've worked with for the last 3 or 4 years through a collaboration with a small nonprofit called Orphans Overseas. And so the town of Thika has a couple of areas that the locals call slums. So I'm going to use that word, even though it kind of seems like a strange word, but they call it the slum. This one slum called Gachagi, where I was able to go and kind of take a little walking tour, where I took a picture of this boy with the big eyes. This is a town that has very high unemployment. You know, a lot of the children aren't able to get a good education even when they enter school, but you know, up until the age of 5 or so, most of them don't really have a lot of opportunities. And so Jane herself, she grew up in this slum. She told me about what it was like to grow up in a school that was made out of mud brick, where in the rainy season, you know, the building would start to kind of degrade, and they would get wet and cold sitting on a dirt floor. And she was able to come through that educational system, become a teacher herself, and then through the collaboration between Intel and Orphans Overseas, get the kind of training to bring technology to these students. And just a kind of a sobering statistic about Kenya, if the 30% number about the teachers wasn't bad enough, about 80% of second graders can't read a paragraph in English or Swahili. So going back to this software that John Cartwright had helped to kind of redesign, this was the organization that he worked with during his sabbatical. But I think probably the most important element, similar to Dennis, is that these approaches, you know, bringing technology into a classroom environment, for example, really don't work on their own. So any story you've ever heard about, you know, the computer that's delivered and left in the street, and the students just figure out, or you know, they just figure out how to make it work themselves, and they don't need any training. It's just, that is, in my opinion, a total fiction. And if you really want to change the quality of education, you have to work with the teachers. And so here's a picture here of a training that I was involved in, working with 5 or so teachers from the Caribou Center, this preschool in Thika. And you know, we're having a great time. I mean, we worked for a week together. It was hard work. I set very high expectations of them that by the end of the week they would be creating lesson plans that leveraged the software and hardware, the whole solution that was in there. You know, I wasn't going to be telling them how to do it. They were going to do it, and we were going to work on it together. So that kind of hard work really paid off. And on the final day, each of the teachers, including Jane, were to give us a presentation of the lesson plan they had created. And there was a power outage all day long, so that's why she's presenting off of a classmate PC that's on a chair up on the table. But she presented a presentation on how to use a piece of software that, you know, basically has a little bit of Swahili early learning literacy and numeracy content for like 4 or 5-year-olds. And she came up to me afterwards. She said, you know, Luke, that was the first time I've ever given a presentation. And she was really incredibly proud of herself. And that was about 2 years ago, and she's continued to the point where just recently she was able to do a teacher training for about 60 teachers from the community. And she realized as she was doing her training that 2 of the teachers in the audience were her teachers when she was a girl. And so she was able to present her former teachers with certificates. Very, very proud moment for her. And then just to kind of touch on the impact a bit from the project itself, we were able to do kind of a pre-test and then a post-test about 6 months later, and using a standardized test called DIBBLES. If you're interested in literacy, you can look it up. It's a 5-minute test you do with a stopwatch that tests, everything from written, reading, comprehension. Their scores doubled in about 6 months. And so, in that context where 80% of children across the country, let alone in a very high poverty area, can't read a paragraph, it was a pretty stunning result. And Jane now knows how to deliver that test. So I wanted to come back to this, this lonely road here that all of us are starting to go down, and if possible, leave you with a few sort of words of wisdom. And I think this applies, whether you're running your own organization or doing research in the field, or whether you're just getting started or contemplating kind of getting involved. And the first is to find the people. So, finding those people that you work well with, I think, is incredibly important. Finding people that, there are a lot of different visions of what good humanitarian work looks like, and they don't always align, and I think finding people that you see eye to eye with and can work well together with is really important. The second is, when you're doing your work, really cultivating the people side of things. And I can't tell you how much time I've spent on some of my initiatives. If I had to look back and think, how can I do better? Time spent writing MOUs and creating work plans and roles and responsibilities charts and all of these things that were incredibly time consuming when, in my opinion, what we should have been doing was really getting to know each other. And I talked about these different people coming together, sitting at the table. The differences in expectations, timelines, the differences in organizational cultures, and what our objectives are for an initiative can be so different that you really have to spend time just becoming friends, essentially. And then the third thing, kind of the final thing I'll say, is to don't forget about the other people. So the people who are actually our quote-unquote beneficiaries. And this, I think, especially from the corporate perspective, you can spend a lot of your time in pretty comfortable ballrooms like this, nice conference rooms, nice offices, beautiful air conditioning, and to never forget about the people like those who are right now being affected by Ebola, or women who have to walk an hour to get dirty water and firewood that's harming their health and their family's health. So I think the ability for us, as much as possible, to always keep those beneficiaries in mind is critical. So I just wanted to thank you very much for your time today.
Luke, good morning.
Morning.
Bill Leedy from Alaska. Is energy the elephant in the room? If we don't solve the energy problem, including the consequences of CO2 going in the atmosphere, is that going to overwhelm all the other things we're trying to do? And how do we adjust that focus and priority?
Well, I think with education in Africa, it's very important to keep the elephants out of the classroom. I'm not sure I understood your question. No. So, I mean, energy on multiple levels is a huge issue, obviously. I mean, just for the viability of our projects, I forgot to mention with our collaboration with World Vision in Kenya, we're now bringing Solar City into the equation, and we're sending a joint team just in a few weeks where they're going to be up on the roof installing solar while we're inside setting up a lab and training teachers. So just the ability to explore alternative sources of energy, especially in markets like Kenya where solar prices are just really coming down rapidly, and let's face it, grid penetration isn't what it should be, and isn't moving fast enough. From a climate change perspective, you've probably exceeded my mental capacity. I will tell you that within Intel, there are people far smarter than me that are interested in working on that issue from a number of perspectives, from energy efficiency to policy advocacy and a lot of different areas. So we're really focused on efficiency from our own footprint perspective. Intel's, I think, the largest purchaser of renewable energy of any company in the U.S. And so that's a very important issue for us as well. And yeah, thanks for your question.
A whole bunch. I don't know who was first, so just get a couple mics going.
Okay. I had a question. So I know Kenya is one of those places where, for instance, used consumer electronics would be repaired and resold. So there's a market for our older technology there. What role does that play in terms of old stuff that we would throw away in terms of being repurposed in these economies, for which that may actually be an improvement from what they have now?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, if you spend time in sub-Saharan Africa, you'll see a lot of things that maybe started their life somewhere else. I think the clothing trade is a particularly maybe egregious one, where there's a lot of evidence that it harms local sourcing, local manufacturing. You know, you'll see kids wearing T-shirts from Guns N' Roses 1993 tour. So that's a little bit disturbing. In terms of technology, I do think it creates kind of opportunities at that sort of entry-level basis where you can buy a computer that maybe it works well enough for a really reasonable price. Obviously, on the mobile side, I think that's where things are getting really exciting. You know, the ability to buy a decent, new, reasonably good cell phone for $15 to $20 is life-changing for a lot of people. You know, is it a phone I want to carry around with me all day? Not really, but I used to have one like that, and it had a little LED flashlight, and hey, that was better than my smartphone I have now. In terms of, I'm not an expert on the sort of the supply chain for used equipment. Let me just say that end-of-life issues from an environmental perspective is really important to Intel. But I will just make a comment from coming back to my theme of these public-private partnerships. In my opinion, I see, except in some very rare circumstances, particularly around relief situations, I see very little use for technology donations. I really don't think it's the place to go. And just me personally at Intel, people approach me all the time. Hey, I need 20 laptops. I need 100 computers. I need 1,000 computers. And if you really want to engage and get all of these sectors working well together, donations are just not going to cut it. Can you get a project off the ground? Can you help a few people? Yeah, but you're not really speaking the language of that company and getting them involved in that sort of innovation process that gets them deeply embedded into these markets to the point where you don't need to rely on donations, where you have the technology there on the shelf with local dealers. I think that's where I would like to see us go.
I wanted to follow up on a couple of points and use, I think it was Jane as an example, as well as the idea of venture capital, is that how can we take someone like that, as part of our Community Solutions Initiative, we're looking for entrepreneurs that we can actually create a business and have them run a micro-utility. And so how can we take someone like that and take them to the next level where we give them all the training with lots of pro bono support, where they can actually run a business and grow it successfully, and then not be looking and asking, what's your exit strategy? The last thing we want is an exit strategy. We want them to grow this for life. So how can we kind of take those extremely talented people and move them to where they can run their own local businesses?
Yeah, it's a great point. I don't have much to add. I agree with you completely. And I think partly it's a numbers game, right? Invest in and help as many people as possible, because some will decide to exit and do something else, and others will just take it and run with it in ways that we really couldn't have imagined. Intel's starting to get involved in a big way in the girls and women's space in Africa, a project called She Will Connect that's trying to get 5 million women with access to internet and technology. And I'm just looking forward to seeing the ways in which these women will be able to use technology to their benefit. We have time for one more, or should we?
Let me just say, make a comment with respect to the last question. That question represents a mindset that we need to work to change. And so if it's not good enough for your child, it is not good enough for the African child. So let's just remember that as we think about taking things to Africa. My question then goes to the partnerships that you've talked about. You've talked about, of course, Intel, government, and World Vision. And those are the big boys. Could you give us some idea of the smallest partner that you have? The reason I ask this question is because for those of us who work at the grassroots in Africa, we find that we are always too small to take advantage of the stuff that you've described here.
Right. That's a good question. It's hard for me sitting in Santa Clara to find people at the grassroots. You know, I'm not on the ground like I used to be, but we do try. Actually, Orphans Overseas is a very small nonprofit. They work in Kenya exclusively. Well, they work in Vietnam a bit, but they have a very small team that's focused on running a single preschool and supporting that community in Thika. So it's possible to engage, but you know, as much as I dislike this kind of quest for scale at all costs, I really want to focus on quality. It's just a little bit easier, just from a logistical perspective, to work with organizations like World Vision, where I can, you know, call a counterpart and he's in the same time zone as me, or you know, those types of things. But I appreciate the question. I'll think about that, how we can do more, because I agree that there are so many grassroots organizations that are doing tremendous work. So thank you.
Hi. So I know that you weren't presenting a paper, so the kind of feedback that I'm about to give you is probably not what you were expecting. But I'd like to give a little bit of a critique, partially for your benefit, but partially for the rest of the room as well. There's two things that you said. One is talking about the beneficiaries of our work, and the other one about that idea about putting a computer and the kids just go and do it being a fiction. I'd like to sort of call you to the floor on both of those. One, that there aren't really beneficiaries of our work in Africa or Latin America or any other less developed country any more than there is here in the States. They're partners, and we need to remember that we're not going in as colonialists, we're going in as partners. And when you're talking about education, if you trust the teachers to sit with you and guide you as they're learning, trust the children to do the same, because that's going to help us to get better education. Even the Khan Academy has seen that the child-driven learning actually does work. So.
Great, thank you. I agree with your first point. I don't like the word beneficiaries. Just that was the word that came to mind. I think we all know who I'm talking about. I agree they should be partners. I mean, they should be telling us what to do, right? The second point, maybe let's agree to disagree. I think if you take the teachers out of the equation, Khan Academy is great, but the teachers are just incredibly important. They need to change the way that they teach. The classroom needs to become more student-centered. But they still need to play a fundamental role in terms of facilitation. So thank you for your comments.
All right, at this point, I guess we have time for maybe one more very quick question, and then we'll get Camille up here. Over there. It's a good thing you yelled.
So my question has to do more with the definition of corporate social responsibility. In the work that I do, I have found two extremes of how corporations and people view CSR. There are those who believe that CSR is the silver bullet of how corporate citizenship is going to solve all the problems of the impacts that they have on communities. On the other extreme, there is a great deal of skepticism. They view CSR basically as window dressing, a way for corporations to basically get away with anything. So I would like to hear your view on how you, particularly in the CSR position that you hold at Intel, how do you view whether you are somewhere in between, or is the spectrum that I describe completely misguided?
Thanks for your question. I personally think that definitions of CSR are maybe an interesting academic exercise, but everybody can define it how they want. I think every company goes on kind of a journey, and you have to try things, and you have to see what works, and you have to experiment. Intel, we've been at it for 40 plus years. I really believe that we see it as being an incredibly important part of our existence as a corporation. So you'll have to take me at my word for that. We don't see it as window dressing, and it's very distributed across the company. I mean, I'm on a team of 5, but everywhere you go, from a business unit to a factory, there are people who are thinking about internally our footprint, externally what's the impact that we're having, how can we improve it. I think we're a values-driven company. Every company will go through a different kind of a journey, but I don't think anybody should believe that CSR is a silver bullet, even for action from the level of the corporate actor. And so that's why I think it's so important to think about it from that shared value perspective, where our business groups are an important part of the equation. So how do you get into the innovation cycle so that a company is selling the kinds of products and services that are having positive impacts on people, rather than just hoping that a combination of creative philanthropy, employee engagement, operations excellence, and other things can lead to the kind of impacts you want, even in partnership with the other kinds of stakeholders. So I think we need to go beyond that. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Really appreciate having Luke here. And have a small thank you gift for Luke. Now, does anybody know what this is? A few of you guys recognize. These are actually really heavy duty. They're wonderful lights. They have all these different patterns on them, and I've used these pretty heavily. There's something made by PowerFlare, which is a local company here. However, you can also drive over them with a semi, so they're pretty non-destructible. They're a lot of fun. There you go. I won't turn it on because I didn't put the batteries in it, but thank you very much. Really appreciate it, Luke.
Thank you.
Yes, they will.